Welcome to the podcast, Working Drummer. Dynamic interviews that tell you everything you need to know about being a professional drummer and a few things you may not want to know. Produced by Mike Jackson and hosted by myself, Matthew Krause.
All right, start.
So we're both from Columbus.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, and you were living down here in Nashville.
Mm-hmm. I moved here in 87.
87.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't long after that you came back to Columbus to visit us at Capital University, where I was a sophomore.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
You know, I have this country drumming book out with Alfred Publishing.
Yes.
Was that book already out?
It was not.
Okay. Well, that was out in 94. So that was a bit of a benchmark year. So it might have been just prior to that.
It was. I graduated in 94.
Okay. All right. So it must have been 92 then.
And I bought the book in 94, I believe.
Well, there you go.
Still have it.
Awesome.
I do want to talk about that for sure. I guess what I wanted to say was it was really significant. And I don't know if you knew at the time how significant it was. I mean, you came in, you're like, look, here's some charts that I wrote for the band Allies.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I remember, and I mean, you had a way to kind of present what you were doing. Say, look, guys, here's what I'm doing. I mean, you had an air of confidence, and you had you were demonstrating what you were doing and challenging us to understand. Look, do you know how to separate yourself from the pack?
Right.
Do you know? And remember this. Do you know what a Texas Shuffle is? Does anybody know what a Texas Shuffle is? You know, all these things that, I mean, we're studying, you know, we all grew up playing pop music and classic rock, and we're digging into, you know, traditional bebop and all these other styles that Bob was presenting to us, Bob Breithaupt. And, but you came in with a completely different spin. Like, I know a lot of you probably aren't familiar with a lot of country styles, a lot of what's going on in Nashville, even though there was this, you know, transplants from Columbus that were moving down there, digging into the music business. And we knew that Nashville was very much like New York or Los Angeles at the time. It was a you know, very significant music town.
Yeah.
So
in a different time then. I mean, it's still very significant, obviously, maybe even more so, but a different opportunity then. Yeah, for sure.
Right. So that was the first time we met, and but that was a cool thing, man. It really, I think it started the wheels turning for me.
Awesome. Well, that's cool.
And so I don't know. I don't know if you knew kind of, did you do that in other places? Did you go around? I mean, that seemed early on.
Yeah, I did. You know, I have a master's degree in music. And when I went back to school, for two reasons. Both reasons were because I felt like after my 4 years at Capitol and then going on the road for a couple of years with a local Columbus, you know, singer, I still felt like there was some more stuff out there that I needed to know, some more stuff to learn.
Right.
And I wanted to be in a different environment. So I moved to Memphis, and I went to Memphis State, which is now University of Memphis, but it was called Memphis State at that time, the mid-'80s. And man, completely different culture. And it was exactly what I was looking for. I wanted something different. I wanted a music style town, but something different. Elvis was from Memphis, so, you know, it had to be cool. I mean, and so much of the early development of jazz happened. Memphis was, you know, a part of that too.
Right.
And so when I first moved there and I started checking out the bands, I was like, wow, man, this sounds different. This is different than anything I've ever heard in a live setting. Maybe I heard some of it on recording, but I didn't really understand what I was, you know, sometimes you see it, you understand what you're listening to a little bit better, you know. And so I spent 2 years in Memphis, and that in and of itself was a huge education. Plus, I was a graduate assistant, so I was a teacher, so I was required to teach college students. And I didn't take that job lightly, man. I was very serious about making sure that I had a clue before those guys came in. Some of them might not tell you that, but
yeah. Well, so what did you do to prepare for that? I mean,
first
Because
of
you were
all,
still pretty young.
I was very young. I still had, I practiced like crazy. First of all, I felt like if I needed to help these guys or try to show these guys something, I needed to be able to play it.
At least one lesson ahead of them.
At least one lesson, or at least 15, 20 minutes worth of a lesson. Anyway. But I started like evaluating the jazz ride pattern, for example, because we're in jazz, at universities that were teaching jazz primarily.
Right.
So why in the heck do we go ding, ding, da, ding, ding, da, ding?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that it was based off early snare patterns, that sort of thing, and just the overall feel. Then this is all in a nutshell. And what came through the hi-hat came over to the early bounce ride cymbals and so forth. But still, why was that? And so I started trying to do some research on just various reasons. Why do we play 2 and 4? Why do we do the things we do? Because I felt like if I was responsible for teaching somebody this, I wanted to know what was the point. Why are we doing this? Is this just where it feels natural? And I mean, there are, you can read various books and articles and so forth about this, and maybe we can get into that later. But the point for me was, as I was preparing, I was just trying to do some research to figure out why is it we play the way we play. Is if I'm going to teach an 18-year-old to come in and he wants to be a player,
yes.
It's more than just about hitting the drums.
Yeah.
For me, for every student, I suppose I could probably sum up any one of my lesson programs into pretty much 5 minutes, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. Make music. Learn how to make music.
Right.
And if your music is Memphis style stuff, or it's Chicago shuffle or a Texas shuffle, or Western swing, Western shuffle, Western swing kind of stuff, whatever. My point is, having an understanding of why of each of those genres of music and what the nuances of all of that is the difference. I mean, so I felt like in teaching students early on, the thing I wanted to teach them was, if you want to play a certain way, if you hold the sticks a certain way, give me a viable reason why you do that. Mm-hmm. Don't just hold the sticks cockeyed because that's what you do, because you set up your toms.
I think understanding the history.
Yeah,
and
why. In the process of that, just teaching guys to play, give the music everything it requires from you.
Right.
No matter what that is. If you're in the 80s, there were a lot of metal bands and hair bands and so forth. If you're playing in Twisted Sister, well, cool. I mean, if you're going to play that, or you're going to play some old R&B, or you're going to play straight ahead jazz, or you're going to play, straight up pop kind of a thing, whatever it may be, whether you're playing in a symphony, whatever it may be, somebody wrote a piece of music, and it's our job to help frame that piece of music in, no matter what it may be. So whatever your passion is, and whatever drives you musically, just make sure that you give the music everything it requires from you.
Yeah.
And that was always kind of my basis. And I felt like you said a second ago, the best way that I could do that was to make sure I understood the development of it.
Right. And it's funny because it's hard to remember that the drum set as an instrument is a very young instrument.
Not old at all. I just had this conversation with somebody yesterday, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And, and if you think about even the development of the drum set in the early 1900s, up until about the 1950s, was primarily jazz-oriented stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then in the 50s, when rock and roll was introduced, but think about the distance from like 1955, 53, 55 to 1970.
Oh, yeah.
And then what Bonham was doing, even what guys were doing in the late 60s into the 70s, through the 70s, in that short 20 to 30 year period.
Amazing.
The change of the drumming from ding, ding, ding to, whatever. I mean, to an athletic event.
Well, and guys using ride cymbals for crashes, because the crash cymbal, especially in the 60s, really wasn't what it is we think of it as today. It was, and to bring up Bob Breithaupt again, one of the things that I remember he used to say is, especially when we were young drummers, and these some of these more contemporary drummers were our heroes. He said, well, to understand why he plays the way he plays and why he inspires you, go back to what his influences were.
That's right.
And then find out what that drummer's influences were. It's like, well, he liked Mitch Mitchell. Well, who did Mitch Mitchell listen to?
Right.
And who did that, and drummers, and we've talked about this before, where, that development of rock and roll in the 50s and 60s especially, their heroes were jazz players.
That's right.
And those bebop players were listening to, the way jazz was 10, 20 years before that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the development of stick control and playing from Civil War drummers that were still alive and still were teaching and introducing Moeller technique and all these things. So it's really fascinating. And now, at my age, when I meet, wonderful, talented young players, and they're talking about their influences, and I'm going, wow, I remember when that guy first entered the scene, and now he's your influence. It really amazing. It amazes me.
It's interesting because I had an interesting moment. A guy emailed me not long ago from a university and says, I've been tasked, one of my assignments is I have to do a report on a historic drummer, and I've chosen you. And I was like, what? Me? I ain't that old. Anyway, so
contact my nurse. She'll set up an appointment.
My caregiver. I was like, wait, what? Have I somehow, catapulted into legendary status or something? How did that happen? Anyway,
how do you strike that balance? I mean, somebody like Steve Gadd turned 70
something.
Well, you know what? He's just come out with a record, and it's called 70, and I don't know.
Yeah, but that record's they probably cut it 2 years ago. So
yeah, so he could be 71, 72.
Yeah,
that's not young.
Mm-mm.
He's a legend.
And he's playing like he's young, though. I mean, he doesn't look like he's missed a beat. He's pretty great. Yeah. I was very flattered. I don't think, this is a college student, and
is he a music major, or was
yes,
he? Okay,
and and he's the same age as my son, basically. So, I was flattered. I don't think he meant how it kind of sounded to me, but I was very, very flattered that somebody took the time to do some research on my body of work that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of, and I'm a session guy, man. I've been since a very young age when I started playing the drums and discovered who Steve Gadd was, because he was clearly, one of my biggest influences. And I'll tell you who my first big influence was. It might surprise you here in a second, but when I kind of decided, what do I want to be when I grow up? My answer would be a session musician.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't a drummer per se, although that was the instrument of choice. It was, I want to make records. I want to make records. I love playing live. Don't get me wrong. I love touring, and I love playing live. I love playing music, period.
Right.
But back when I was younger, that was my path. That was my career path. I while some of the people I was going to college with at Capitol were studying to do things that were going to put them into a job the day they graduated, my whole concept was, I love the recording studio environment. I love the smell of recording gear.
Yeah.
I love the smell of the studio environment. I love when that red light goes on and your level of expertise has to jump 1,000%.
Well, gear, man. I can already tell just from us setting up.
I've been around it a long time. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to, no joke. My dad in Columbus, my dad was named Gene Fullen, and Gene was very in the 60s. He died in 1971, actually. Oh, wow. So through the 60s, late 50s and 60s. My dad was a TV and radio personality in Columbus.
Okay.
And had a show called Dialing for Dollars and Pinbusters, and he kind of knew everybody, and we had famous people come over to our house quite often. From what I recall, I mean, I was pretty young. I was only 9 when he passed. So he gave me my first guitar when I was 5 years old.
Wow.
You know, little kind of 3/4 instrument. And my family's been very musical. So I've been around the concept of writing songs, making music, reading music, listening to music. One of the huge perks of my dad being a DJ was that he brought home promotional use copies of everything.
Oh, wow.
And my mother still has probably all of them or most of them. And I mean, it would be everything from back in now you're talking about this era, okay, the 60s, but it would be mostly the jazz oriented stuff, but it was anything really. And so, I mean, we have Frank Sinatra records, we have stuff, it's all promotional use only. These were not for resale in great condition records. 78s that my mother would bring home. And so I would listen to them, and I remember being as just a little kid, listening to them and just reading. If you remember, I don't know if you guys remember any of this, but if you look at some of those old recordings, they show up like in a book, and you open it up, this giant book, you open it up, and there'd be maybe 5 78s in it, 3, 4, 5 78s in it. And each sleeve was like a novel. I mean, you could just read the liner notes of everything. Everything. As opposed to now where you download it on iTunes and you have no idea who did what. You can't find anything. So back in those days, and I would start seeing the same names, you know, show up on many of these records. And I would just flip through this stuff, man, and I'd listen to the 78. And by the time you'd listen to one side, you'd get about halfway through that page. It was funny. It was like my reading level and one whole 78. You know, I could get through one half of a sleeve in one record. So I'd flip it over and I'd listen to the next record. By the time I was 18, I had already, some of the people we were talking about earlier, prior to this filming in Columbus, there was a recording studio that developed called Gracewood Recording Studios that later was absorbed into the Morning Star. But at Gracewood, I started recording there when I was 17. And one of the things we were tasked with doing was every Saturday at 8 a.m., we'd get together, and there was 4 of us, my brother, Dave, myself, a bass player, and my friend Russ Nagy. And the bass player was a guy named Jay Louder, who you probably know too.
Oh my gosh, I know Jay Louder.
So Jay lives right around the corner here. And the 4 of us, we were a team. And every Saturday, we were tasked with writing like 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe even 8 music beds.
Really?
And all day Saturday, we would just record them. So it'd be like, every week we'd do.
You were playing drums at the time.
I was playing drums.
Okay.
And I was at Capital University as a freshman.
Okay.
And this had all just they built the studio. And so every Saturday, this was my job through college. I got paid a couple $100 a week or something. I don't even remember what it was. And I don't think it was that much, but every Saturday we would record music beds. Well, those music beds started getting picked up. And I remember maybe about a year later, I was watching TV, and one of my music beds was on this local substation called Dexter's Substation in Columbus, Ohio. And my music bed was their theme song. And I was like, are you kidding me? You know, I had just gotten published, you know, for the first time. And my music made it to public television and, or to satellite television or galactic television. And so then we continued to have more and more of those experiences. And I did that all through college. So my love affair with the recording studio, plus through that,
was reinforced. I mean, just by that success.
Every Saturday, man, you imagine, you know, practicing was one thing. But every Saturday, I'm in the recording studio playing music, evaluating, is that a good take? Is that not a good take? The learning curve, first of all, was pretty tremendous, but then the growth of any musician when you're in the studio. That's why studio players are so good. I wanted to play with the biggest and best that I could find. And even though I loved working with everybody. I mean, I was working with my brother. I was working with, guys that I grew up with.
Right.
They're all tremendous musicians.
Right.
It's not about that. We were making cool little projects, but I'm looking at what Steve Gadd's playing on with Chick Corea, or with, when he did the Al Jarreau record, or when he did, and I would go to the local concerts and see guys play. And I'm like, man, I just want to be in the middle of where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the car on our way to this gig, Von Weister said, man, you should consider Nashville.
Interesting.
And I was like, don't they make country music there? I mean, I'm not opposed to country music or anything. I love country music, but because remarkably, we had a lot of it in our house. But he said, it's such a great recording town, and it's a pretty cool place. Yeah. And he had apparently just visited or something.
Okay.
And so you know what? I actually came here and checked it out when I was in college. And I thought, man, this is a really cool place. Plus, I was I'm a pretty good little Christian boy, and I grew up in the church, mm-hmm. and I'm a pretty spiritual guy, and I got into playing a lot of contemporary Christian music. Amy Grant was young but huge at the time, and DeGarmo and Key, who Greg Morrow played with.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I was a fan of Greg's before I ever met him. Yeah. And I met him in Memphis actually. So, hey, Greg. Greg was an influence. Paul Lime was an influence. There were a lot of guys that have become friends and colleagues that
and that music was coming out of Nashville.
It was coming out of Nashville.
Yeah.
So, Paul was still recording a lot of the stuff probably in L.A., but I was equating it with Nashville.
Yeah.
When I moved here in '87, in 1990, just 3 years later, I connected with and joined the band Allies. Mm-hmm. Contemporary Christian band, mm-hmm. Probably the best band I've ever been a part of.
Wow.
Just great guys.
Yeah.
We made great music. And then they loved the recording studio too. So beyond Allies, we were making records. Randy Thomas was producing other artists. And of course, Bob Carlisle was our lead singer. And then Bob Carlisle went on to have a solo career, and then Butterfly Kisses became his mega hit in '97.
Okay.
So, but Bob was our lead singer, and the guy is probably the most soulful rock and roll singer I've ever worked with in my life. Mm-hmm. If you're not hip to him, go listen to Allies, Feather in Your Cap. You can find it on YouTube.
Okay.
Man with a Mission, anything from the Man with a Mission record. But if you go, they're up on YouTube now. You can find.
Is this you on drums?
Me on drums.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Mark Hill played bass. Okay. And Scott Sheriff was our keyboard player, who has 12 Against Nature. That's his band.
Oh, right.
And then Scott is just now playing with Carrie Underwood.
Okay.
So Scott was our keyboard player. So we all date back to 1990, 91 together. Well, 91's when our record came out. And unfortunately, it's the only Allies record that I'm on. Okay. The guys previous to that, they all lived in L.A. Great band. But when Randy and Bob decided to move here, they were the primary writers and producers of Allies.
I see.
They decided to move to Nashville, and the other guys decided to stay in Los Angeles. Then they put a new band together here in 1990, and I got an opportunity to join that band.
So what was your role? I mean, were you a member of the band? Were you playing drums? That was your role as drummer?
Yeah. Let's put it this way. I was not a partner in Allies, but I'm on the records, posters, considered a member of full, from business side, not my name's so not on the contract.
Right.
From a recording and playing side, I am the drummer in Allies. Yeah. It wasn't like a sideman game.
Sure. Well, I think one of the reasons why I asked, because again, I want to bring up that meeting, the first meeting I had with you. You showed us charts of music, of things that you had written out. And these were we're talking staff paper with kick drum pattern, snare, and fills written out. It's the first time I'd really seen that much detail outside of a modern drummer article.
Right.
And you're like, I'm on tour with these guys. Here's my charts. And I'm like, why is he writing charts? I mean, we're all memorizing songs. Is he play with this band? Is he subbing with the band?
I got you. Yeah.
Was that the band you were writing charts for? And was that just because you had a couple new songs? What was that?
Well, there were a lot of new songs because when I got the gig, I think my first concert with them was 2 weeks later. And it's complicated music.
So maybe you just had them left over, or you still had referred to them?
No, I think I was reading them.
You were reading them
the first couple of gigs.
Gotcha.
Until they became second nature, and then until it was memorized.